everybody. My name's John Ruzika. I'm with Yellow Dig. I'm our Vice President of Partnerships. I joined the company about 3 months ago, so I'm still getting my feet wet. But it is great to see so many familiar faces and names in the chat there. So please keep that coming. I'm going to be your host for the day, so I'll be watching the chat and the Q&A function to make sure that we cover any questions about the topic. And I think this is of great importance. That I can see that we have a lot of folks that are interested in the topics, and really it's about that push pull of that introduction of technology. And I don't want to steal too much of Tanya's thunder because I've seen what she's going to do here, and it's great. But that the idea that as we increase the use of technology, as we kind of put new things in the browsers and the LMS and those sorts of things, it continues to be further isolating for students, or it can create that easy path for them. And so some of what Tanya will talk about is some of those friction moments. And so we're kind of reducing so much of that friction that we're losing some of that meaning within learning. So um, I will let Tanya, the expert, kind of give us her topic on that, or her talk on that. But just so you understand who she is. She's been a friend of Yellow Day for quite some time. She's a leading voice in the educational innovation, with over 2 decades of experience guiding institutions through technological transformation. She's worked with universities across 6 different continents, from Hong Kong to Amsterdam to Beijing, on projects ranging from online learning strategy to large-scale AI integration. Most recently, she served as Assistant Dean for Educational Innovation and Chief Learning Officer at the Geese School of Business, University of Illinois. She's also held senior leadership positions in Nebraska, University of Nebraska, and the University of Florida. So she's now leading her own shop, the Inspire Higher Ed, and we are really, really happy to have her with us today. Tanya, welcome. Please take it away.
Thanks so much, John, and thanks for the opportunity. I think one of the things I didn't mention to you in my bio is one of the projects I'm working on is with Bowling Green State University, where we're really looking at AI and how it can impact teaching and learning as well. So that's been a fun project to be working on as well. Um, so thank you very much for having me here today, and I'm happy to be able to talk about this topic, and especially to recognize what we're talking about here. So I talk a lot about the human plus AI companion collaboration space, and really where that fits and how, as you mentioned, the idea of technology and its place with our human nature as well. And so when we think about how we're leveraging technology, there's a lot of rush to adopt these technologies, to recognize that they're pretty much in everything. You do a Google search, you're going to get AI results almost without even trying. And so AI is a piece of everything that we're seeing and we're doing, and we recognize its huge impact on learning. There's a lot of opportunities for us to think about the growth and the potential and the opportunity to help people with learning when we talk about AI. But there's also, as you mentioned, that idea of, um, how do we ensure that the technology isn't what we're focused on? We're not questioning the value of AI in education. It's definitely there. Clearly, there is a way that education can be impacted, both for positive and negative, but hopefully more for positive. Um, but when we're designing these educational experiences, what we're trying to do is make sure that we're leading students toward human connection rather than away from it. And so while we have these AI tutors that can be available 24/7, and we have automated feedback that can really enhance what students are able to learn in the moment that they need the help. And we can see where adaptive content and discussions that bring in lots of different perspectives, these are all very valuable. But they really, if we just rely on that, can quietly reduce the human interaction components that are really important to our learning experiences. And so we need to be very intentional about the design of that. And so, what we want to talk about today is how we can, from a human perspective, keep the design of learning to focus on that. I'll let you go ahead and advance the slides there just a little bit. So here's our scenario. We have a student who is working late at night. They need help. They can get instant feedback from an AI tutor, and that's absolutely great. It gives them the flexibility to be able to learn when they need to learn. It reduces their anxiety because they're not having to wait for someone to answer their email or to be able to have office hours. Those things are good. But if that is the key point, that's the destination, that's where we're going, then all of the human connection is stripped out of that experience. And so when we think about how we design learning, what we're wanting to do is make sure that we're recognizing the value and importance of the human in addition to the value and importance of the technology. And so that they're both being leveraged. I'll let you go ahead and advance there. So just to kind of let you know a little bit about the research associated with this, I won't dig into it in great detail, but I just wanted to show you kind of the pillars of evidence around what we know. So we know that students who recognize how struggle works in learning and that they're able to reframe it as something that's normal, that mindset helps them with belonging. And so we want to be able to give them opportunities to see that it's normal to struggle, that it's normal to have things that are challenging, that all friction isn't a bad thing, and that helps with persistence. We also recognize that high achieving students have failed not from a lack of ability, but from being alone in their learning. And so we want to make sure that we recognize the value of humans that way. And we also know that it takes both academic and social integration in to encourage students to persist in their learning. And so that connection piece isn't a separate thing. It's a part of what we're working on. So the core here is that isolation and feeling alone can be really difficult for students. And so when, next slide, sorry, I'm not doing a very good job of keeping up with the slides. So what we want to talk about here is some connection points that we can examine. Where are there places where we can have where we can identify when students are stuck and what they can do about it? To also see places where it makes sense to design collaboration into the learning experience. When is it important for students to work together? And when is it okay to have that be something that they do on their own? We want to recognize the value of feedback and conversation, dialogue, but when is it something that it just needs to be transactional? And when is it something that needs to be a conversation? Where is that? Where is that piece? And then also talking about the value of struggle in learning. There are clearly points in learning where it's developmental for students to struggle. And if we remove all of that friction and we remove the human from that process, then what are we doing to the students who are struggling and need a connection to another person? So let's go ahead and walk through some of these. So the first one is focused on help seeking and how do we help students to know when they need help and how do we build their confidence. So AI is a great way, has a great way of being able to help students who maybe feel uncertain about what they don't know or they're concerned that they might look stupid or not prepared to help them have the confidence to be able to go talk to a human. And so whether that's a chatbot where they can pre-ask some of their questions or practice that conversation, whether that's a resource that they can have summarized and then help talk through, those kinds of things can help build their confidence so that they know when they go talk to the human, they're going to be better prepared for those conversations. It can also help them to eliminate some of the initial confusion so that when they go and ask their questions, they're able to be more clear about what they're looking for. And anytime we can give students the opportunity to practice being vulnerable in a low risk environment before they actually have a high risk environment, that's a good thing. So how can we help the students to have that designed into the process? Some of the things that really matter there is helping students know that they belong, that their struggle is actually signaling a need for them to get mentorship and wisdom, not just the answers that the technology can provide for them. And sometimes the connection itself is actually the outcome that we're looking for. And so we want students to feel seen. We want them to be heard. We want them to feel that they are valued and not just that they got their answers solved. So I'd love to see in the chat, and we'll come back to the chat later, but I'd love to see in the chat a little bit of how you can see the value of having AI help students to feel prepared for those talking points. All right. So let's next talk a little bit about collaboration. And I'll let you go ahead and advance the slide there. There we go. All right. So we've seen that the research that shows that high achieving students, when they came into an environment where they were learning something new and they were studying alone, that they failed, not because they had a lack of ability, but because they were alone and isolated. And so once we brought those students together in the study, then we saw that they were able to master concepts more efficiently and persist longer at higher rates. And so when we think about group work or we think about collaboration or interaction in learning, we want to help students to know when it's good for AI to be a part of that and when it makes more sense for humans to be a part of that. And so if we have designed a system where the students never need to interact with each other, they only ever need to interact with the AI, and they can get all of their questions answered, then we might be designing out those experiences that help with the human connection and help people to feel like they belong. So again, in the chat, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you can see AI maybe helping with that. One way I can think of it is we could actually have an environment where AI is not necessarily the the tool that is being used, it is helping in some way. So, in other words, maybe we have a group conversation and AI is kind of listening in the background and is collecting notes and giving feedback on the group discussion later. But it's still the humans that are having that interaction. So that's one way you could use AI in that space. So here, what we're thinking about is when is feedback something that is just a, 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 a mechanism, a transaction, and when is it something that needs to be human built feedback. And so we know that feedback in terms of AI, there's some great strengths there. Speed, consistency, being available 24/7, being available without tiring. I can continue to have the same question over and over again with an AI. And they don't that person who I might have that interaction with might be like, okay, I've already told you 6 times. Why do you keep asking me? It's like, because I don't understand it. Well, AI is going to be a lot more patient, be able to, oh, okay, let me answer that. Let me answer that. So maybe answering it a different way. So there are really good strengths that we can recognize with AI when it comes to feedback. But one thing that AI can't do, even if it's kind of simulated, is be empathetic and build trust and build a relationship. It can simulate those, and in some cases, that can be actually very detrimental to people if they get into that echo chamber where everything that they're asking the AI is responding in a way that is reinforcing whatever it is they're thinking. That can be really bad if it's a negative track. And so we recognize that these models and how they respond, they tell you what you want to hear. If you want to hear one track, you're going to hear it. If you want to hear another track, you're going to hear it. And you can ask the exact same questions and get different answers depending on what you're looking to hear. And so humans are less likely to do that. They're more likely to try to be empathetic, to be kind, to build that trust with a give and take that is more realistic. And so we want to make sure that we keep that aspect in our educational experiences. And so another question for you in the chat is to be thinking about, when does what you're talking about, what you're designing, what you're planning into your course, when does that need to be a human dialogue, and how can you support that? And how can you have handoffs between the technology and the human interaction? Again, like we talked about before, maybe the tutor or the chatbot is there to get you started, to make you feel comfortable, to have you practice those conversations, maybe even with personas that you can try different tacks. But then at what point does it then turn it over and say, you need to go talk to a person about this? And making sure that those pieces are designed in. All right, next, talking about struggle. Anytime you think about growth, you think about change, you think about failure. These are all places where struggle is important, where we don't want students to struggle so much that they can't recover. We don't want them to fail and not feel like they can recover from that failure. But the greatest growth comes from from challenges. And so if, thinking about climbing a mountain, if I'm uh, never having to take more than a 10-degree angle, then I'm not really growing and strengthening myself. If I have to take and do like a 95-degree angle, that's too hard. And so we need to find places where there's enough challenge and enough struggle that there's growth while still building the confidence and the capability to be able to do so. And so when we think about where our courses are sending students when it's related to AI can be a first response. It can be a thought partner. It can be just a tool, but it shouldn't be everything. And so how do we help students is another question for the chat. How do we help struggling students have pathways to grow, but also a pathway to support and human connection, and not getting stuck in a loop where all they're doing is keeping going back to the AI or having the AI solve the problem for them? All right, so let's think about this human plus AI design. And the key here is that we're not saying don't use AI. We're not saying that AI is detrimental if it's used appropriately. But what we're saying is, how do we position it in a smart way to drive students to the human connection rather than around it or away from it? And so it is really about both efficiency and belonging. We want people to have access to support. We want them to have the information that they need, but we also want them to have that human connection. So we can use the same kind of tools. We just have a different intention with the design. And when we're intentional about design, that plays out into better learning experiences for the students. So what are some of the strategies that we can do for that? I'll give you a few here. The first one is AI as a warm-up. So you can use AI for preparation. We've talked about that a little bit. That leads you to a human conversation. So maybe there's some AI guided pre-work that then is fed into a live discussion or interaction. And it becomes the on-ramp rather than the actual end of the story or end of the journey. Second strategy is AI as a connector. And so we can program the AI, whether we're creating a tutor, a bot, or an assignment, we can program into that process nudges towards human resources. So, for example, you've asked 3 questions about this topic. Here's a study group that's meeting on Thursday. Would you like to go? Or you seem to have some really great ideas about this topic. Here are some people you should talk to. In fact, that's one of the things I've recommended to the Yellow Dig team, is to find ways to bring people together because of some of the common conversations that they're having in the Yellow Dig platform. So maybe prompting them or introducing them to other people who have interesting ideas that they can share with each other. We value the way in which AI can show us patterns. And we also value that humans can help us to feel like we belong. And so bringing those two together is really beneficial. All right, strategy three. This one is AI as a scaffold for vulnerability. And so when we say, I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm talking about, that moment can be managed through a tool that helps us to practice, to clarify what we're really talking about, to build confidence, and it also helps us with the reflective process. So I might initially reflect on something in a way that's very surface level. But if I'm working with an AI chatbot, I could have that chatbot designed to push back a little bit or to ask me questions instead of me just asking it questions. And so, in that way, it allows for that development of what I really think and that building of the confidence that is a lower stakes entry to a conversation with another person. All right, strategy four. This is maybe counterintuitive a little bit, but intentionally designing friction into the system. So we want to find moments where the human interaction is actually the outcome. And if that's the case, then protecting those touch points that help to build community. Not everything that we do should be around efficiency and considering that as progress. Some of that friction, the you're struggling, I'm struggling, let's get together and have coffee and talk through it. That's actually a good point, and we want to design a system that allows for us to preserve that in the process. All right, strategy five. This one's the human handoff, and I've talked a little bit about that as we've been talking, but explicitly designing into our assignments, our activities, that pathway from human to, or from AI to human. And so how do we put that into the course design? It's a challenge for sure, because what we want to do in many cases is design learning that is accessible and flexible for any learner. And so we recognize that many times people are working in hours that maybe aren't the same. They're working in time zones and geographies that are not the same. And it's challenging to be able to say, how do we offer something that's flexible, adaptable, and able to fit your lifestyle while still connecting you with other people? And so sometimes that's where scale actually comes into a great benefit. If you have more students in the course and you've designed in those human connections, then there's more likelihood that you're going to be able to pair up people or make them small groups because there's more opportunities for more people's schedules. And so, kind of, how do you design learning in a way that you're building in those clear exit ramps from the technology to the people, not just leaving it to chance? All right. So what does this actually look like? If we're doing we're doing what we're talking about here in the before mode, we have students who struggle, they turn to a chatbot, they get their answer, and they're done. And that's it. They're moving on and they're alone. They haven't gone through any human interaction in order to be able to solve that problem. But if we're doing it the way we're talking about, the student struggles, they turn to AI, they get partially answered, they turn to a study group, and then they connect with other people. They build friendships, they recognize other people have similar struggles, they feel like it's normalized, and they're able to move on with support. So, same tool, same process, just a different intention and design. All right. So I think we've kind of talked through this concept enough that I feel like I'm starting to repeat myself. So I want to give you just a couple of key takeaways, and then I'd love for us to actually have maybe some either conversation through the chat or conversation with anybody else to be able to think what you or talk about what you think about this. But key here is, first of all, we recognize that isolation undermines persistence and learning, even when students are highly capable and very motivated. Number two, that seeking help through AI is not the problem. It's just when that's the only solution. And then three is that we want to position AI as the bridge between the human interactions and have it be an intentional back and forth human plus AI design. So I'll pause there before I do any kind of closing thought. And I'd love to hear, John, is there anything in the chat that you wanted to bring up, or you and I can have a conversation, or if anybody else would like to pipe in here, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I would first encourage everybody to either use the Q&A function and or the chat here. Definitely want to kind of open this for some conversation. One of my questions for you, Tanya, is maybe more practical, like a lot of the LMS companies or sort of technology companies have sort of introduced some of these tools. We don't maybe necessarily have control sometimes. So I love the idea of steering your AI to a certain outcome or asking it to sort of have a cutoff or a limiter, like, okay, don't give the full answer, give
Yeah,
partial answer, give them a nudge, let them know that, sort of give them this encouragement that it's okay to struggle. And oh, by the way, here's three other classmates of yours who are having a similar
yeah,
challenge, right? So there's an interesting thought there. I think it may be hard for us, like for me, how do you design that? How do you kind of put those guardrails on the AI that may not be within your control? And that
that's a
may
great
just,
question.
yeah,
I love that question because you're exactly right. Most of the systems are already predefined for you. So this is how I would handle it. I, as an instructor, would have a conversation with my students in the very beginning of the class and say, here's how AI works, and here's how you can best think and work with AI. So having a very natural conversation with students in the very beginning to say, AI, by design, is going to tell you what you want to hear. It's going to give you answers. It's going to jump right to the conclusion. You as the student can change that. Number one, if you're using a chat, an LLM that has configurations, you can set in your preferences that pre-configures, I don't want all the answers. I want you to think through things with me. I want you to ask me questions. But even if you can't pre-configure it to do that, you can, as a student or as any individual, you don't have to be a student, you can specify when you put a prompt in, I'm thinking about this problem. I would like you to tell me more and ask me questions. So sometimes that's called reverse prompting. I put in a question, ask me three questions before you answer. And so it's kind of the idea of you as the human have control ultimately to be able to say, here's what I'm looking for. Here's how I want to work with you to the AI. And then if the AI gives you the answer, say, no, I didn't want the answer. I want to understand. Tell me more. Help me understand. And so in that way, you're pushing back, which is really a critical piece. Your voice is being heard and your input into the system affects the answer coming back. And in addition to that, we've already talked kind of like about how you can get it to interact with you and ask you questions instead of just telling you the answer. You can also build in it to say, at what point should I turn to my instructor for more help? Or at what point do I have a good enough understanding I can go talk to my study group? So you ask for what you want and you'll get it.
I love that reverse prompt. I'm going to do that too because sometimes I don't get the output that I'm looking for from the AI, and it's because I'm too fast. I'm moving too fast. I just kind of plug in a question. It gives me something I don't expect, and I'm like, I need to start with like, ask me three questions before you give me anything. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have a very good question in the chat. It says, how do you differentiate AI from plagiarism?
Well, by its nature, generative AI is not plagiarism. I know there's some conversation around that, but because it's generated, it's not exactly duplicating anybody else's work. So we can't call it plagiarism. I will call it cognitive offloading or providing AI with the capability to do a task for you as a tool. We don't want students to use AI as a tool. We want them to use it as a thought partner. And so, what I would encourage instructors to talk to their students about is how can we recognize your voice in the response that comes out? And some of that is what we just talked about that interaction, about that back and forth, that iterative nature. But it's not, even though it's built on all the language that ever existed that we've put into the model, it's not actually plagiarism. And so we do need to move away from calling it plagiarism. It is taking away from the student's voice being heard in the responses. If I put in a prompt, write me an essay on this, it's going to give me an essay, and that is not plagiarism, but it's not my work either. And so a better way to say it is help me write an outline for this essay. Help me think through each level of the essay, help collect my input, and help me to rephrase it in ways that is more clear or concise or better adapted to my audience. Those kinds of back and forth processes can really help with that. But then at some point in the design of the assignment itself, we ought to be having the students say, you know, maybe I need to not just ask AI, but also ask a friend or also ask a peer. And so getting input from multiple sources can be really valuable.
That's great. We have another one in the Q&A function, so thanks to those of you who are populating that with good questions. Um, so this question is really about maybe a tool. So how do I use an AI tool to help me build a tutor
Mm,
for my course? So something that's very specific, like course specific with some maybe some potential guardrails.
yeah. Well, there's a couple of different ways in which that can be accomplished. Some tools, if you have a pro account, allow you to build a bot or a tutor that actually you can train it or use a knowledge base that's specific to your course. Some tools actually are set up so that they can integrate, say, into your Canvas or your Blackboard or your D2L site, where it's only feeding off of the content of that course. And so students ask a question about some course content. It's going to answer the question. They ask a question that's irrelevant to the course, and it's in most cases going to push back and say, I don't have any information on that because it's not actually just pulling from the large language model itself. It's pulling from the knowledge base that's in the course. So that's one way. You can also teach students how to use tools like Notebook LM or others where the information that they put in is where the answers are coming from. And so, say you have some course documents, they can take those course documents, put them into the LLM, and then have a chat conversation with that is specifically asking questions about what's in there. And so that's another way you can do it. But again, trying to design into that process when it's appropriate to ask the instructor, because maybe that question just isn't answered in the course. And it might be something that would be really helpful for the instructor to know that that particular question is not answered. And then that gives the instructor an opportunity to build more course content or to expand on things.
That's great. Yeah. A lot of tools out there. I want to bring up one that's actually in the chat, so most folks may have seen it, but I think it's a good question here for us. Um, so thoughts on the impact of asynchronous forums. So as people
Mhm.
are sort of connecting asynchronously, when students sense or feel or can tell, it's obvious that these posts or the replies were created by peers that are that are using AI tools. So what do we how do we approach that or how do we think about that as facilitators?
I think that is another really great question to have with students up front at the beginning of class. So I usually couch it, and this was long before AI. It was just when students would say the same thing to all the students that were posting their welcomes to say, the exact same rote message to everyone. And that is to say to students, if you walked into a room and 25 people all said the exact same thing to you, how would you feel? Not very good. So, what you can say is for our community, let's make sure that what we're saying is really authentic to what we think and is individualized to the person and we're responding to. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't say this is what I want to say, put it into a format using Grammarly or one of these others. Sometimes I will do that with Claude where I'll say, this is what I want to say. Help me say it in a kind and inclusive way, to help me make sure that I'm considering other people's perspectives and things like that. that's fine. But if anybody's been on LinkedIn in the last year and a half, you see these posts that you absolutely know that it just got spit out of of a chat bot. I don't know that they get as much interaction because it doesn't feel authentic. And so, using a tool to help you shape your message is different from using a tool to just give you a message. And so, having that conversation with students in the beginning is, I think, very important. And then, one of the things I really like about Yellow Dig is that if enough people really feel like your messages are inauthentic, they're not going to interact with you, and therefore it kind of falls down in the dynamic feed. Or secondly, if they really feel like it's egregious, they can flag it and then the instructor can follow up with the students to be able to say, hey, you're not really being a good member of our community. Can you adjust?
Yeah, it's about establishing those norms up front and having students feel that a sense of ownership of the community so that they can flag and sort of, weed out any of that sort of
Yeah.
behavior. And just to
Yeah.
take it up a level, the idea also that I think that discussions or community that's a forced participation, and there's an element of like, I have to be here, I have to be buttoned up, my answer needs to be perfect. That's
Yeah.
when I think students feel like they need to turn to AI for a lot of reasons, and they plug in these answers that are buttoned up. They're beautiful, they look good, but you can tell where they came from because they're getting graded. They're there because they have to be, not because they want to be. And so if you
Yeah.
can remove that element of the requirement or the assessment of students' participation, then you can actually free them to be authentic. You can free them to be there because they want to be, because they're looking for help. They can show vulnerability, which then actually gets a lot of interaction and engagement because everyone's encouraging. So that's the
Yeah.
other sort of maybe other side of that
And
answer.
I think that is a real valuable point for you as an instructor to reflect on. Why am I using a discussion or a community? What is my intention? Is my intention just to have them all be compliant, to check boxes? In most cases, I don't think a single instructor is doing it just to check the boxes. They really do want students to share what they think. They really do want to have that discussion, but maybe some of the requirements that they're putting on those discussions are stifling the discussions. And so, I, in fact, Brian Rodine and I have often talked about this idea of Darth Grader. Are we using a persona where we're kind of dictating or mandating to the students, you must do this in this pace and you must do this type of format. And, it's setting up this space where it's not a community, it's not a social engagement, it's an assignment, a requirement. And so being able to allow for short conversations, to be able to allow for spontaneous reactions, to be able to allow for a topic that was discussed in week one to still be talked about in week three if it's really engaging. And so those kinds of practices that instructors have can make or break that community feeling within the course.
We have another question here. It says, is it possible to incorporate IA in getting access to Canvas so that it can help answer some basic questions regarding the assignments? For example, more like a 24/7 TA.
There are definitely tutor tools that can integrate into a course site that are really tied to that course site. And so there's a couple of different products that are out there that can do that, where you just build that chatbot into that course and it's specific to that course and answers just that course's questions. Similarly, you could do it outside of the LMS in something like Notebook LM, where you're putting the course documents in. I've seen instructors who created a Notebook LM for that course. They've loaded all of their course materials, and then the students all can go to that same notebook and they can query it. They can do the deep dive to get summaries. There's even video components now and infographic kind of things. So, mind map, and it's all kind of related just to those materials that are in that notebook.
That's great. I love this question that we have in the chat. It says, if some students use AI to help them write an outline, another don't, doesn't that interfere with the integrity of the course? How can an
Mm.
instructor, oh my God, it moved. Sorry, just give me a second. How can an instructor, oh God, okay, it lost. Just one second. Someone posted something and just moved. Um, so that, okay. How can an instructor be sure that all students understand the productive writing process? That's the question.
So I want to reframe the question just slightly because I think it addresses two different things. One is rigor. We want the course to have rigor and we want the learning activities to be such that students actually have growth and change over time in the course. So, understanding the process of learning and understanding the elements that are important for learning, those are part of the rigor. And so, how we design the assignment is going to be around that rigor, not making it too easy, but also not making it too challenging, specifying what the outcomes are so that the activities actually lead to those outcomes. That's one piece of it. The other piece is how do students do the activity that you want them to do? And I would pose this hypothetical question. I ask students to write an essay, and two of the students get together and talk about how should we outline this and what's important to have in the essay. Another student is has great mom and goes to his mom and says, "Hey, I have to write this essay. How should I structure it? You've got experience writing essays. Help me." And another student goes to AI and says, "I've got to write this essay. Help me with an outline." Are any of those three different? What do you think, John? Would you call them different?
Not really.
No, they're all turning to something outside of their head to get support. And that's not a bad thing. If I were writing an essay not for an instructor, but just because I like to write, I'd probably do the same thing. I would turn to another resource to think through, how I write it. And so I don't think that we should be telling students they can't use AI for this process. What I think we should be doing is number one, making sure the rigor is there and the important things that they need to do with their own brains are being done with their own brains. But number two, recognize that we get resources from lots of things. In fact, we all have ideas that come because we saw a commercial, we saw a video, we saw something out there in the world that we were interacting with. There's nothing new. Every idea we have comes from something. It's trying to make sure that we give credit to where that idea came from so that it's recognized that we all stand on the shoulders of giants, that everything that we accomplish is because of some other kind of resource we had available to us. And so, in the same process, if we're using a technology, we ought to be able to say, I had a conversation with Claude, and Claude helped me to write this outline. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, interesting. So the one of the other things that I think about is kind of bringing it back to your sort of your opening thoughts about the importance of belonging and creating that motivation to want to connect with others as
Mhm.
opposed to just creating a scenario or a system that promotes checkbox activity or sort of like just get it done. I think that a lot of times leads to, turning to AI because there's no motivation to connect with students. There's no real reason to. So they're kind of
Yeah.
just following the system that's been built for them as opposed to going, okay, here's a spot where I can really, connect with peers, learn from others, those kinds of things. So it's more of a comment maybe than a question, but
Well,
just
it reminds me of a bot that I built that I really enjoy this bot because it basically, let's say you would have typically given students a quiz on a topic. Um, and that quiz would have multiple choice, pick the answer, and they could very easily just Google the answers if you wanted to, or use AI to just be able to get the answers. But instead, I designed this bot to have a conversation about the topic. And in setting up the bot, you could just ask the quiz questions, right? But then they could still pull up ChatGPT, pull up Google, and get the answers. So what I did instead was I said, I want to give this bot the opportunity for students to choose its persona. And so the very first question is, Hi, I'm here to have a conversation with you about topic X. Would you like this, or this, or this persona? The quirky philosopher, the rough and tumble drill sergeant, the collaborative mentor, whatever they were, or would you like to pick something else? And so the students are like, well, I like the drill sergeant, or I like the quirky philosopher. And so it takes on that persona. And then it says, now, would you like to set the scenario in? I was teaching strategy, and so I would have, it was a strategic question. So I would say, would you like to set the strategy in Star Trek, Great British Bake Off, chess game, sports game, or something else? And so then they pick something. Oh, I really like sports. Okay, so the quirky philosopher is going to ask you sports related questions about this topic of strategy. Why would you want to go and ask Google for that or ChatGPT? Because you're engaged, because you got some agency, you got to choose who you're interacting with, and you got to choose the context in which you feel comfortable talking about the topic. So if we build that into what we're doing, then we're kind of designing out the idea that students would just go get the answer somewhere.
Yeah, that's great. Some good chatter here in the chat on the sidebar there. I don't see and I don't think I'm missing any other questions, but there's some good ideas there. Um,
I really
any
like the difference between cognitive offloading and cognitive abdication. And I think that comes both from the instructor side and the student side. So are we abdicating our voice? Are we giving up our opportunity to be human in the moment? And so even though that's not talking about connecting with another human, that's being true to who I am as an individual. I don't want my voice eliminated. I don't want my responsibility and my role to be taken out of the process, because it's going to affect me in the long run. If I'm being asked to do a marketing plan in a course, and I want to be a marketer, I'm going to need to know how to do a marketing plan. And I'm going to need to know it well enough that I can talk about it to my boss or to a potential person who's hiring me or to a peer as we're working on a marketing plan. And so I don't want every aspect of developing that marketing plan to be done by something else with no input from myself and then be in the job, be in the role, and being asked to do it and go, I don't know how to do that. That's just not a good place to be.
exactly.
So we have like a question here for you, Tonya. It says, is your bot available for other courses?
The bot, the one that does the conversation, I would be happy to share with anybody who, if you just want to connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message, I'd be happy to share it with you as an example, but I want to teach you how to build it yourself because it's specific to my context and I want you to learn how to build it to your context. Because if you're teaching writing, that's going to be very different from me teaching strategy. But the concept works really well in any case. And so send me a note on LinkedIn. Happy to follow up with you, give you the bot instructions, and help you to figure out how to design it for yourself.
If you like, Tony, you can share your LinkedIn here in the chat so
Ah, yeah,
everyone
let
can
me
connect with you. John,
grab
I
it
would
really
love if you
quickly
can do
here.
the same so people can join and connect with both of you in LinkedIn. Tony and John, if you could just share that. I
Yep.
know this wasn't planned, but I'm putting you in the spot here.
I will put mine into the chat.
Yeah,
That is my LinkedIn. And then if you'd like to hear more about what I write about, here is my Substack. There you go.
that's amazing. So,
I
I don't
also,
think
yeah, sorry, Glenn. I also put into the chat so before it gets lost in all the links, like I've been doing a little digging on the importance of belonging, and there's a study that sort of now there's an update that came out a couple of weeks ago that sort of links the importance of belonging. You know, their initial study was sort of that it leads to persistence and you know consistency within education, and now their update for 2025 is that it actually leads to increased graduation rates. So just some interesting things there if you want to dig deeper on kind of the importance of belonging. Um, yeah, I mean, we can go ahead and you know, if folks want to post their LinkedIn and connect with others. This is obviously a topic that um, is very meaty, as evidenced by all the questions and some of the you know some of the challenging things that everybody's dealing with these days. So go ahead and wrap up here. But Tanya, thank you so much for participating today, for leading this discussion. I know there's going to be a lot of people blowing up your LinkedIn inbox there. For
Happy,
folks,
happy to do so.
yeah, thank you so much. And then, so for folks that may want to learn more about Yellow Dig, kind of what we do and how we think about being part of this conversation and removing that mandatory requirements of those elements that we talked about by building real student connection and real student communities, feel free to reach out to me. And in fact, most of you and many of you already we know, and we've talked to you before. So thanks so much for those of you who are participating and building that discussion on the side there.
All right. Thanks so much for having me and appreciated all the conversations in the chat and the questions and happy to follow up with anybody after this.
Thank you so much. Take care,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody. Bye-bye.